And a name you know and a face you know with a brand new book telling her story. A Little Bit Vulnerable is the name of it, on Hollywood, God, sobriety, and politics. And Janine Turner is the author. She joins us now. Janine, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for taking a little bit of time to join us today to talk about the book and what's inside. And it's out today. Today's the first day people can grab it, right?
Today is the big day. Yes, sir. Well, it's been available on Amazon and Kindle and all that. It's #1 on Kindle right now in memoirs. That's pretty exciting. But today it enters the bookstores. Yes, sir.
So tell us a little bit about why you decided to put pen to paper and then tell people about what you've experienced in your life.
Oh, wow. Well, where to begin? I decided to compile this book for many reasons. And, I guess once you hit 50, I can look back and say, well, I've sort of had many different chapters in my life. And I sort of try to be of service with purpose and here in life. I thought, well, let me compile this and see what comes together. So, it deals with a lot of different chapters, and it's unique in that it's different genres of writing, so it's not all the same. I've really actually never seen a memoir quite like this. So I chronicleize my life, but the opening deals with Hollywood, the rejection I dealt with Hollywood, my broken engagement with Alec Baldwin, my early sobriety, and I do it with this poetry that I wrote 25 years ago or 30 years ago or so, and I put on a shelf, but I wrote it right then in the middle of it was my coping skill, in the middle of the drama, in the middle of those black holes where I was so destitute I didn't know what to do and so depressed and even in sobriety, and I wrote, that was my way to not drink and to not do myself in, was to put pen to paper, and so it created such a powerful punch. I went ahead and included that, and it's pretty vulnerable, and that's why my daughter said, because I said, I feel a little bit vulnerable. My daughter said, well, that's the name of your book. Then I have, the second chapter is Federalist Papers essays, where I break those down to the relevancy. I pick 45 of the 85 of them and why it's relevant today, and then I have 3 chapters on politics. I have transcripts from my radio show. I have another chapter about how to keep sober, with a letter from my great-great-grandpa who was going through withdrawals in the 1900, probably 1900, and a transcript with Bob Beckel where he and I talk about sobriety. And the last chapter is dedicated to my father, who died while I was putting this together. So I crawled through great grief, and so it really has a lot to offer. If someone's lost someone a loved one, I kind of have a C.S. Lewis Grief Observed letter dedicated to my dad, as well as some poetry. And he was a West Pointer, and I loved him so much, and still I'm devastated every day that he's not here. So, if someone's looking for sobriety or going through depression or rejection or just want to talk about politics, women in politics, culture in politics, it's politics in general, it's all there.
Janine Turner with us, the new book, A Little Bit Vulnerable, on Hollywood, God, Sobriety, and Politics. We'll get linked up on our Twitter feed in just a little bit, but Amazon.com and elsewhere, available today in fine bookstores everywhere. Yeah, it's an amalgam, because you've had a varied life through Hollywood, through getting involved in politics a bit on the O'Reilly Factor. People may have seen you speak at the Republican National Convention in 2012. You've had a radio show as well. So there's a whole lot to pack into a book like this. When did you kind of turn, I don't want to say turn, but when did you begin to focus a little more on your political leanings? The radio show, being involved in politics, making sure people knew where you stood on issues.
Good question. That's a really good question. Well, my father, as I mentioned, was a West Pointer, and he was one of the first to fly twice the speed of sound in the 1960s. So I was raised with that sort of, in the air, like Reagan talks about. Patriotism was just in the air. And my father was very quiet. We didn't talk politics at the table, really, but I remember looking up at my dad when I was 8 years old, and I remember this moment, which was sort of odd, but I said, Dad, if our founding fathers were to come back today, what would they be most disappointed about? And I don't know what 8-year-old asked that kind of question. But it's always sort of been this innate love of country. I had a teacher in 5th grade that really inspired me. We put the play 1776 on all year, and so teachers can have a wonderful, amazing impact on kids. And so, I was always a kind of a loner and outsider in Hollywood, because they were running off the Jane Fonda parties, and I wasn't. I have an op-ed in Breitbart.com that was out yesterday talking about what it was like to be engaged to a Hollywood liberal and to deal with all that. But, essentially, I set my daughter down the hammock a couple of years ago. No more like 5 years ago. She's about 10, 11, 12. And we read the Constitution. I read the Constitution to her, and afterwards, I'm like, I really want to understand exactly what this means. So I launched my own foundation, Constituting America, where we try to educate youth about the Constitution in a cultural way with songs, and they do their own songs, their own short films, things of this nature. And it all just progressed. And then I branched out into opinion editorials, and then I became a pundit on Fox, and then I started my own radio show. And I'm just very concerned about our kids' lack of ability to reason, that we have no God in schools, that, we're losing the relevancy and the importance of our founding documents, and I want to preserve our republic, so I've become really pretty vocal about it. It's been my mission.
Janine Turner with us. The book, A Little Bit Vulnerable, JanineTurner.com is her website. You alluded to, or just actually just flat out pointed to, this piece in Breitbart.com yesterday, which I read, what it was like being engaged to a Hollywood liberal. And this is about your time being engaged to Alec Baldwin, a name people know, 1982 and 1983. He is, you cannot deny how skillful he is. He is a great actor, and yet we see these stories off screen where he's fighting with photographers and fighting with almost everybody. Was he like that back then? Was he as volatile as he appears to be today, even back, 30 years ago at this point?
I know. Can you believe it? 30 years ago now. It's like, where does the time go? Well, I loved Alec, just for all his great attributes you just mentioned, charming and smart, and I fell in love with him. I was going to marry him, and we had the wedding. I talk about this, and I talk about it in my book, what we were going through. But, and actually my relationship with him didn't work out. I mean, we had the dress, the churches, the invitations out, but I learned a lot from my relationship with him, and I'm a better person today because of what I went through with that situation. And, I think Alec has always been challenged by a lot of different, I don't know, how do I put it? I think that he's a complex person. So he's always had these complexities with which he's had to kind of master and deal with. And I still consider him a friend today, but it was very difficult. It's so funny because when we fell in love, we didn't realize our political differences. And I remember I called him once and I said, "Hey, William Sapphire just wrote an article and he wants Republicans to step forward, young Republicans," and that's me. And there was this long pause on the phone. He said, "Are you a Republican?" And I said, "Yes." And then he's a long pause. He goes, "Well, I guess I won't hold that against you." But it was very difficult to sit around those tables as a Republican. I voted for Reagan. My father was a West Pointer, and they were all running off to Jane Fonda parties. And I was essentially told to sit in the corner and keep my mouth shut. Not by him, but by the groups of
Sure.
Democrats out there. So it was really tough. It was a tough time. And I've learned from that to not be a hypocrite, to not be prejudiced, to not be, biased, and to learn that we need to reason, and we all need to be able to hear other people's points of views and learn how to reason. Thomas Jefferson thought that was essential. Our founders really thought that was essential.
Janine Turner with us here for a few more minutes. It's Riley and Scott here on WROK. Her new book is A Little Bit Vulnerable. Do you think it's easier to be known as a conservative or even a libertarian these days in Hollywood? I mean, you have the actors who perhaps have had that, I don't want to say stigma, but you know what I mean. In Hollywood, it probably is. Clint Eastwood, John Voight, Robert Duvall, but there are some of the younger actors like you. Vince Vaughn is probably more toward the libertarian. Adam Carolla, too, is probably more libertarian. But the conservative libertarians, is it easier, I guess, to not be a flat-out liberal in Hollywood these days?
Well, that's an excellent question. There are groups forming out in Hollywood, but a lot of them don't want to step forward yet. I've had, when I was campaigning for McCain Palin, I had an actor when I was on Friday Night Lights step out of the trailer and say, "I'm with you, but don't tell." I mean, people are really petrified, and that goes against the American spirit. Those in Hollywood that want those First Amendment rights to do whatever they want, and ironically to have that capitalist spirit, like George Clooney in Venice getting married with thousands and millions of dollars. They want to live the life of Riley, and they want to have the freedom to do it, but gosh darn, don't tell them about the Constitution or, or anything of that nature. It's just a crazy world. But I do think more of us are stepping forward. And you mentioned the word libertarian, and I talk a lot about this in my book. I take on primarily the progressive Democrats, but I do challenge the Republican Party that we need to be more open-minded with social issues. I mean, I have a unique lens in this area, a wide lens, not a zoom lens. I am a single mom. I've raised my daughter alone for 16 years. Didn't work out with her father. And so, we need to kind of watch our rhetoric as conservatives, and because we're losing. We need the women's vote, and we need the social vote. And so I think the libertarian, is probably pretty much more where I am, but I think that the Republican Party needs to go that direction because it keeps the social issues on the peripheral. Because really our founders and our Constitution, and really constitutionalists, it was all about governing and freedom, freedoms of our liberties. And I think that the Republican Party needs to watch that rhetoric. I feel it as a single mom, and I'm really getting pretty vocal about it. And I actually am seeing some changes with some candidates and some, Republican representatives, and primarily it comes from the pundits anyway.
Janine Turner with us. The book, A Little Bit Vulnerable, on Hollywood, God, Sobriety, and Politics. It's Ronnie and Scott here on WROK. Before we let you go, I think we've touched on everything in the title of the book, except for the sobriety part. And I know that's a very important part. Again, it's a varied book, but the sobriety is very important to you. 28 years of sobriety after alcoholism, and I talk to people who have gone through things like this. It still is a struggle. It's a day-by-day kind of thing. How have you been able to stay sober for those 28 years in an industry where a lot of people aren't?
Well, and in a world where people aren't.
Sure,
a lot of people want to point to Hollywood, but I always, it's everywhere. Alcoholism is everywhere, and alcohol is everywhere. So it is difficult. It is one day at a time. God is the focus, higher power, and a great sense of coping skills that I talk about in my book in different genres. I mean, I even have an interview with Bob Beckel in there where we differ politically, but we came together on my radio show, and I have the transcript in there where we talked about sobriety. And it's a one day at a time deal. It's a hereditary disease. My first chapter talks about chronicalizing early sobriety, the rawness of it, and then the later chapter of my book talks about how to keep it. And it is difficult. It is I even have a letter from my great grandpa JB where he chronicalized what it was like to detox from John Barleycorn with seeing snakes and raccoons, and the paintings were talking. He thought people in white jackets were coming to get him. I mean, it's a horrendous disease, and it's cyclical, and so I address that and even in my poetry in the beginning, I only have poetry in one chapter. I don't want to freak people out, but I talk about dealing with Freudian aspects of our lives and this cyclical aspect. So it's a devastating disease for a lot of Americans, and I finally decided to go ahead and be vulnerable about it and open up, because if someone could read it and be inspired, or someone who knows somebody and one life can be changed, then the whole thing was worth it.
Janine Turner, there you go. The book, A Little Bit Vulnerable, on Hollywood, God, Sobriety, and Politics. Best of luck to you in the future with the book, which I'm sure is going to do great. You're working on a couple of movies now, too, and the radio show and the punditry. It's all happening, huh?
Yeah, one day at a time, right?
That's right. All right, Janine Turner, thanks so much for your time this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you.